The sound of a gavel striking wood is usually the sound of justice. But in courtroom 4B, it was the sound of a guillotine. Judge Evelyn Sterling didn't just preside over her court, she ruled it like a personal kingdom. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could spot power just by looking at the price of a man's suit. So, when a quiet black man in a simple jacket walked into her courtroom and refused to bow down, she laughed. She mocked him. She threatened to throw him in a cell. She didn't know that the man standing before her wasn't a defendant. He was the one holding the handcuffs, and by the time she realized who he really was, it was already too late. The air conditioning in the casual courtroom of the sophisticated district court of Clayton County was broken, or at least it felt that way. The air was thick, smelling faintly of floor wax and nervous sweat. But up on the bench, elevated 3 feet above everyone else, Judge Evelyn Sterling looked as cool as ice. At 55, Evelyn Sterling was an institution. She had the kind of steel-grey hair that was coiffed into a helmet of authority, and eyes that could cut a defense attorney's argument in half before they finished a sentence. She was known as the Iron Gavel in the press, a nickname she secretly adored. To the public, she was tough on crime. To the people inside the legal system, the clerks, the bailiffs, and the public defenders, she was a tyrant. "Mr. Henderson?" Evelyn sighed, flipping through the file in front of her without looking up. She checked her Rolex, a gold Datejust that cost more than the bailiff's car. It was 3:45 p.m. She had a reservation at Le Monarque at 5:30, and she had no intention of being late. "Your client has been arrested for driving with a suspended license for the 3rd time. The plea is denied. Set bail at 10,000. "Your Honor, 10,000, the public defender stammered. "He's a delivery driver. He makes minimum wage. That's effectively a remand without—" "Then perhaps he should have taken the bus," Evelyn snapped, slamming the file shut. "Next!" The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Officer Miller, who had been working this courtroom for 20 years, looked down at his shoes. He hated days like this. Evelyn was in a mood. She was sweeping the docket, crushing lives with the casual indifference of someone swatting flies. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned. Usually, people entered quietly, trying not to draw attention. But the man who walked in moved with a specific kind of gravity. He was a black man, perhaps in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered. He wore a grey suit, off the rack, slightly rumpled, the kind you buy at a department store when you need to look presentable but don't have a fortune to spend. He carried a battered leather briefcase. He didn't sit in the gallery where the family members and spectators sat. He walked straight through the swinging gate of the bar, the area reserved for attorneys and court personnel. Evelyn stopped writing. She peered over the rim of her reading glasses. The silence in the room became sharp. The man walked to the prosecution table, which was currently empty, as the assistant district attorney, a young man named Josh Ryland, was busy shuffling papers at the defense table. The stranger placed his briefcase on the table and stood there, silent, looking directly up at the bench. Evelyn stared at him. She didn't recognize him. And in Evelyn Sterling's court, if she didn't know you, you were nobody. "Excuse me?" Evelyn's voice rang out, sharp enough to slice glass. The man paused. "Yes, Your Honor?" "I don't recall calling your case," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with condensation. "And I certainly don't recall inviting you to stand inside the bar. The gallery is behind you." The man didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just held her gaze with a calm, unsettling intensity. "I'm not here for a case on the docket, Judge Sterling." Evelyn laughed, a short, barking sound that lacked any humor. She looked at Officer Miller. "Miller, Do we have a comedian in the court today? Or just a wanderer? She turned back to the man. Listen to me closely. This is a place of law, not a shelter and not a social club. If you have business here, you file it with the clerk. If you are a defendant who missed his slot, you sit in the back and wait until I deign to acknowledge you. Now, remove yourself from that table before I find you in contempt. The man's expression didn't change. He opened his briefcase. I'm afraid I can't do that, Judge. The courtroom gasped. The public defender dropped his pen. Officer Miller's hand drifted toward his belt, though he didn't unholster his weapon. Nobody spoke to Evelyn Sterling like that. Evelyn's face went flush. The veins in her neck tightened. She leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the mahogany bench. You can't do that, she repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? I do, the man said. His voice was deep, steady, and carried to the back of the room without shouting. I know exactly who you are, Evelyn. He dropped the "Your Honor." The disrespect hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn stood up. Her robe swirled around her like black wings. Officer Miller, she screamed, losing her composure entirely. Take this man into custody. Immediate contempt of court. I want him shackled and booked. 30 days in county. Let's see if he remembers his manners after a month in a cage. Officer Miller hesitated. He looked at the judge, then at the man. The man hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. There was something specific about him. Miller! Evelyn shrieked. Miller took a step forward. Sir, you need to step back, he said, his voice pleading. He didn't want to arrest this guy. The man turned his head slightly to the bailiff. It's okay, Miller. Stay where you are. Then the man turned back to the judge. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. Don't you reach for anything, Evelyn shouted, genuinely panicking now, assuming the worst. He's armed! Miller! The man pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. A gold badge caught the overhead fluorescent lights, gleaming brightly. My name is Marcus Thorne, the man said, his voice cutting through the chaos. I am the senior investigator for the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, and I am the lead special prosecutor appointed by the Attorney General. The room went dead silent. I'm not here to be judged, Evelyn, Marcus said, his eyes locking onto hers. I'm here to tell you that you are the subject of an active criminal investigation. For 10 seconds, the only sound in courtroom 4B was the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. Judge Evelyn Sterling sank back into her leather chair. The flush in her cheeks didn't fade. It turned a blotchy, sickly grey. The name Marcus Thorne was not unknown in legal circles. He was a legend, a ghost in the system. He was the man they sent when a judge wasn't just making mistakes, but breaking the law. He had taken down Judge Coburn in the Southern District 3 years ago for bribery. He was known for being methodical, ruthless, and impossible to intimidate. And she had just tried to throw him in jail for standing in the wrong spot. Evelyn tried to regain her footing. She forced a smile, a tight grimace of a smile. Investigator Thorne, she said, her voice shaking slightly. This is highly irregular. You cannot simply barge into a session and disrupt proceedings. There are protocols. If you need to speak with me, my chambers are open after the docket concludes. This isn't a social call, Judge, Marcus said. He placed a thick stack of documents on the prosecutor's table. And we aren't going to chambers. We're doing this right here, on the record. He pointed to the court reporter, a young woman named Sarah who looked terrified. Keep typing, Sarah. Don't miss a word. This is outrageous, Evelyn snapped, trying to summon her old fire. I order you to leave. You have no jurisdiction in my courtroom while I am presiding. Actually, Marcus said, opening the file, As of 8 a.m. this morning, your jurisdiction has been suspended, pending an emergency hearing. The Chief Justice signed the order an hour ago. He held up a paper stamped with the state seal. You're trespassing on the bench, Miss Sterling. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. She looked at the gallery. People were taking out their phones. The local court bloggers were typing furiously. This was a nightmare. She had to pivot. She had to attack. This is a witch hunt, she declared, looking at the imaginary audience. Because I am tough on crime? Because I don't let criminals walk? Is that why the Liberal State Board sent you? Marcus looked down at his papers. No. We're here because of the Halloway construction case, and the Riverside Development zoning appeals, and the domestic violence case of State versus Bradley Richards. At the mention of Bradley Richards, Evelyn flinched visibly. Marcus saw it. He walked slowly around the table, pacing like a predator. Let's talk about Bradley Richards, Marcus said, addressing the room but keeping his eyes on her. Richards is a wealthy man, son of a local real estate tycoon. He was brought into this courtroom 6 months ago. Charges: aggravated assault against his girlfriend. Photos of her injuries were in the file. Witnesses: a confession to the arresting officer. Marcus stopped. The sentencing guidelines suggest 3 to 5 years in prison. But he didn't get that, did he? Evelyn licked her lips. I exercised judicial discretion. He was a first-time offender with a bright future. I gave him probation. Probation, Marcus repeated, for breaking a woman's jaw. He showed remorse, Evelyn yelled. He showed a bank transfer, Marcus said coldly. The gallery gasped. That's a lie. Evelyn stood up. That is slander. I will sue you for everything you have. We have the wiretaps, Evelyn, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, sad almost. We have the audio from the country club lunch you had with Bradley's father, Mr. Thomas Richards, 2 days before the sentencing. We have the footage of you accepting an envelope in the parking lot. And we traced the deposit of $50,000 into an offshore account in the Caymans registered to a shell company called Sterling Consulting. Marcus picked up a piece of paper. Would you like me to read the account number? Or the dates of the withdrawal used to pay off your gambling debts at the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas? Evelyn was trembling. She looked around the room for an ally. She looked at Officer Miller. Miller, she whispered. Get him out of here. Miller stood up straight. He looked at the woman he had protected for 20 years, the woman who had screamed at him, belittled him, and forced him to enforce unjust rulings. He looked at Marcus Thorne, a black man who had walked into the lion's den with nothing but the truth. Miller crossed his arms over his chest. I'm sorry, Miss Sterling, Miller said loud and clear. I'm an officer of the law. I can't interfere with a criminal investigation. You traitor, she hissed. It gets worse, Marcus continued, flipping a page. See, the bribery is bad, but what you did to the victims, that's why I took this case personally. He pulled out a photograph. It was of a young black man. Do you remember David Elmore? Marcus asked. Evelyn stared blankly. She sentenced hundreds of people. They were all just faces in a conveyor belt. He stood right where I am standing, Marcus said. 2 years ago. He was innocent. He had video proof he was in another city when the robbery happened. But his public defender was incompetent, and you were in a hurry. You wanted to make your 5:30 dinner reservation. You denied the motion to introduce the video evidence because it was filed 1 hour late. You sentenced him to 10 years. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. David Elmore died in prison 4 months ago. He was stabbed in the showers. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. You didn't just take a bribe, Evelyn, Marcus said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. You sold justice. You treated this courtroom like a drive-through window. You looked at men like David and men like me, and you decided we didn't matter. You decided we were nobodies." Marcus took a step up the dais, moving toward the bench. "Well, I'm somebody now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a warrant. "Evelyn Sterling, you are under arrest for racketeering, obstruction of justice, bribery, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Evelyn looked at the doors. She looked at the window. There was nowhere to run. "You can't arrest a judge in her own robe," she whispered, tears of rage finally spilling over. "Then take it off," Marcus commanded. For 20 years, Judge Evelyn Sterling had entered the courthouse through a private underground garage, taken a private elevator to her chambers, and donned her robe in a room that smelled of lavender and old paper. Today, she left through the front door. Officer Miller did his duty, but he didn't do it with malice. He did it by the book, the very book Evelyn had ignored for years. He cuffed her hands behind her back. The clicking sound of the ratchets tightening was the loudest thing in the room. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller recited, his voice flat. "Miller, please," Evelyn begged, her voice cracking. "Don't take me out the front. The press. They'll be everywhere. Use the tunnel." Marcus Thorne stepped in, buttoning his jacket. "The tunnel is for judicial staff, Ms. Sterling. You are currently a defendant in custody. Defendants exit through the main transport bay, or the front entrance if transport is unavailable. And since you dismissed the transport van earlier today, to save time on your docket, we're walking," Marcus signaled to Miller. "Lead the way." As they marched her out of courtroom 4B, the hallways were lined with people. Clerks she had yelled at for typos, attorneys she had humiliated, defendants waiting for their own hearings. They all stopped. Silence rippled down the corridor like a wave. They watched the iron gavel being led away in irons. When the double doors of the courthouse burst open, the wall of noise hit her physically. Click-whir, click-whir. Camera flashes popped like lightning. Reporters shouted over one another. "Judge Sterling, did you take the money? Is it true about the Richards boy? Judge, look this way." Evelyn ducked her head, trying to hide her face, but there was nowhere to hide. Marcus walked beside her, stoic, looking straight ahead. He wasn't gloating. He was simply ensuring the chain of custody remained unbroken. They reached the patrol car. Officer Miller placed his hand on top of her head, the universal gesture to protect a suspect from hitting their head on the doorframe. It was a gesture of care, but to Evelyn, it felt like the final degradation. She slid into the hard plastic back seat. The cage wire separated her from the front. It smelled of stale vomit and disinfectant. "I am a judge," she thought, her mind unable to process the reality. "This is a mistake." At the county jail, the processing was a blur of humiliations. "Name?" the intake officer asked, not looking up. "You know who I am," Evelyn snapped. "Name?" the officer repeated, louder. "Evelyn Marie Sterling. Jewelry off. Shoelaces out. Stand against the wall." They took her mug shot. Front, side. They fingerprinted her. The ink stained her manicured thumb. Then came the phone call. She didn't call a family member. She was divorced, and her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She called Julian Vance. Julian Vance was the kind of lawyer you hired when you were guilty but rich. He wore suits that cost more than most people's houses and had a smile that looked like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Evelyn," Vance's smooth voice came through the receiver. "I saw the news. It's a disaster." "Get me out, Julian," she hissed into the phone. "Get me a hearing, now." "I'm working on it." "But there's a problem," Vance said. "Because you're a judge, all the local judges have recused themselves to avoid a conflict of interest. They're bringing in a visiting judge from the neighboring district for your arraignment." "Who?" Evelyn asked. "Who is it?" "Judge Harriet Moore." Evelyn dropped the receiver. It swung by its metal cord, hitting the wall. Harriet Moore. The woman Evelyn had publicly called soft and incompetent at the state judicial conference 2 years ago. The woman Evelyn had blocked from a promotion to the appellate court. Karma wasn't just hitting back, it was taking aim. The arraignment happened 3 hours later, via video link. Evelyn sat in a small room in the jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. On the screen, Judge Harriet Moore looked impeccable. "Case number 4492B, Judge Moore read, peering through her spectacles. "State versus Evelyn Sterling. Charges include bribery, racketeering, and official misconduct." "Your Honor," Julian Vance argued, standing in the courtroom on the screen, "my client is a pillar of this community. She is a flight risk to no one. We ask for release on recognizance." Marcus Thorne stood up on the prosecutor's side. "Your Honor, the defendant has access to significant offshore accounts, specifically in the Cayman Islands. We have evidence she was planning a trip to Italy next week. She has the means and the motive to flee. Furthermore, she has spent years intimidating witnesses. If she is released, we believe she will attempt to obstruct this investigation." Judge Moore nodded slowly. She looked at Evelyn through the camera. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Moore said softly, "in my court, we treat everyone equally. You are facing serious charges. I am setting bail at $1 million, cash or surety. You are to surrender your passport immediately, and you are remanded to custody until said bail is posted." "$1 million," Evelyn gasped. "And," Judge Moore added, "since the banks are currently closed and your assets are under a freezing order from the Attorney General, you will remain in county lockup for the night. Next case." The screen went black. Evelyn Sterling, the queen of courtroom 4B, was going to sleep on a cot. The cell was cold, not just chilly, but a damp, bone-deep cold that settled into the concrete walls. Evelyn sat on the thin mattress, her knees pulled to her chest. The jail was loud, shouting, banging, the constant clanging of metal doors. She wasn't in general population. That would have been a death sentence for a judge, but she was in a solitary isolation wing. It was safe, but it was lonely. For the first time in 20 years, Evelyn Sterling had nothing to do but think. She thought about David Elmore. The name Marcus Thorne had thrown at her. She tried to picture his face. She couldn't. He had just been a file number, a docket entry. Time served? No. Maximum sentence. Next. How many had there been? How many David Elmores? The next morning, Julian Vance arrived. He looked out of place in the visitation room with his Italian silk suit. He didn't look happy. "I posted the bond," Vance said, sitting down opposite her. "You'll be out in an hour, but we have a massive problem, Evelyn." "The evidence?" she asked, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "It's not just the Richards bribe," Vance whispered, leaning in. "Thorne isn't just looking at the cases. He's looking at the sentencing patterns. He knows about the pipeline." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "The pipeline?" "The juvenile facility," Vance said. "The Redwood Youth Center. Thorne subpoenaed their records this morning. He knows you were sending kids there for minor infractions, kids who didn't need detention. He knows about the kickbacks from the construction company that built the center." Evelyn closed her eyes. This was the buried secret, the one that could put her away for life. "Who talked?" Evelyn whispered. "Thomas Richards?" "No," Vance said grimly. "Someone closer. Your court clerk, Sarah." "Sarah?" Evelyn scoffed. "She's a mouse. She's terrified of me." "She was," Vance corrected. until Thorne sat her down and showed her that she was listed as a co-conspirator on the financial documents you had her sign. He offered her immunity. She gave him the ledger, Evelyn, the one you kept in the safe. Evelyn felt the room spin. The ledger. It had the names of everyone, not just her. The web went higher. "We need to cut a deal," Vance said. "If we give them the mayor, if we give them the senator, maybe you keep your pension and do 5 years instead of 20. "No," Evelyn said, her eyes hardening. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a desperate, cornered survival instinct. "If I go down, I take them all down. But not yet. Thorne thinks he's won. He thinks he's the hunter, but he doesn't know who protects me." "Evelyn, don't be stupid," Vance warned. "Get me a meeting with Senator Harrison," Evelyn said. "Tonight, after I'm released. Tell him the Redwood levy is about to break. He'll know what to do about Mr. Marcus Thorne." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Thorne was sitting in a small, tidy living room in the suburbs. The house smelled of baking bread and grief. Sitting across from him was an elderly woman, Mrs. Elmore. She held a framed photo of a young man in a graduation cap. "David." "I didn't believe it when you called," Mrs. Elmore said, her voice trembling. "I thought the system forgot about my boy." "The system did," Marcus said gently, taking a sip of the tea she had offered. "But I didn't. I was in the back of the courtroom that day, Mrs. Elmore. I was working undercover on another case, just observing. I saw what she did. I saw how she didn't even look at him." Mrs. Elmore wiped a tear. "He was a good boy. He was going to be an engineer. He was in the wrong place, and she treated him like trash. I promise you," Marcus said, leaning forward. "She is going to answer for it. Not just for the bribe, but for David. I'm adding a charge to the indictment. Deprivation of rights resulting in death. It carries a life sentence." Mrs. Elmore reached out and took Marcus's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You be careful, Mr. Thorne. That woman, she's wicked. But the people behind her, they are devils." Marcus nodded. "I know. I'm ready for them." Marcus left the house and walked to his car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. He unlocked his door, but stopped. A piece of paper was tucked under his windshield wiper. He pulled it out. It wasn't a ticket. It was a photograph. It was a picture of Marcus's own daughter, taken this morning at her elementary school playground. On the back, written in elegant cursive script, were 3 words: "Drop it, or else." Marcus stared at the photo. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was the escalation he had expected, but it still hit him like a physical blow. They were threatening his family. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "This is Thorne," he said, his voice turning into cold steel. "Get a tactical team to my house. Secure my wife and daughter. Move them to the safe house. Authorization code black." He crumpled the photo in his fist. "You made a mistake, Evelyn," he whispered to the empty street. "You didn't scare me. You just gave me permission to take the gloves off." Marcus got into his car. He wasn't going home. He was going to the one place Evelyn Sterling felt safe. He was going to crash her meeting with the senator. The war had just begun. Senator Charles Harrison's estate was less a home and more a fortress disguised as a country manor. It sat on 20 acres of pristine lawn, guarded by high iron gates and men with earpieces who looked like they played linebacker for a living. It was 10 p.m. Evelyn Sterling's Mercedes, driven by Julian Vance, crunched up the gravel driveway. "Let me do the talking," Vance warned as he killed the engine. "Harrison isn't like the local councilman, you bully. He's the majority whip. He plays in the big leagues." "I don't care what league he plays in," Evelyn snapped, adjusting her silk scarf. She was terrified, but she masked it with aggression. He took $3 million from the Redwood construction kickbacks. If I go down, he's coming with me. They were ushered into the library. It was a cavernous room filled with leather-bound books that had never been read. Senator Harrison stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He was a silver-haired man with a grandfatherly smile that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. "Evelyn," Harrison said smoothly. "Rough day at the office?" "Cut the pleasantries, Charles," Evelyn said, refusing the drink he offered. "Thorne has the ledger. He has Sarah. He knows about the juvenile detention scheme. I need this to go away. I need Thorne reassigned, fired, or stopped." Harrison took a slow sip of his drink. "Stopped? Like you tried to stop him with that photo of his daughter?" Evelyn froze. She looked at Vance. "I didn't send a photo." "I did," Harrison said calmly. "A necessary precaution. But it seems Mr. Thorne is more resilient than we anticipated. And now you've brought his heat to my doorstep." Harrison set his glass down. The grandfatherly warmth vanished. "You've become a liability, Evelyn. You were supposed to be the gatekeeper. You were supposed to keep the money flowing and the inquiries quiet. Instead, you let a special prosecutor walk into your courtroom and put you in cuffs on live television." "I can fix it," Evelyn pleaded, her voice rising. "I just need the witness list. If we can get to Sarah." "Sarah is in protective custody," a voice boomed from the shadows of the doorway. Evelyn spun around. Vance jumped to his feet. Marcus Thorne stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains of the patio entrance. He was holding a small black device in his hand. A digital recorder. "How did you get in here?" Harrison demanded, not looking scared but annoyed. "Security." "Your security is currently napping by the gate," Marcus said, walking further into the room. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red, but his hand was steady. "And don't bother reaching for that phone, Senator. I didn't come alone." Outside, the red and blue lights of police cruisers silently flooded the driveway, reflecting against the library windows. "You're trespassing," Harrison sneered. "I have immunity." "Not for conspiracy to commit kidnapping," Marcus said, holding up the photo of his daughter that he had received earlier. "We traced the courier who left this on my car. He gave up the contractor. The contractor gave up your chief of staff, Senator." Marcus turned his gaze to Evelyn. She looked small, standing between the two powerful men. "You thought you were meeting a savior, Evelyn," Marcus said softly. "But the senator was just arranging your exit strategy. Were you planning on driving home tonight? Or were you going to have a tragic accident on the canyon road?" Evelyn looked at Harrison. The senator's face gave nothing away, but he didn't deny it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were going to kill me. I have the ledger," Evelyn stammered, looking at Marcus. "I can testify. I can tell you everything about him." "You always turn on people when it serves you, don't you?" Marcus said with disgust. "Officer Miller, Sarah, now him. But you're right about one thing. You are going to testify." The doors burst open. FBI agents in windbreakers marked FBI swarmed the room. "Senator Harrison," a lead agent barked, "step away from the fireplace." As the senator was handcuffed, shouting about his rights and his lawyers, Marcus walked up to Evelyn. She was trembling, holding on to the back of a sofa for support. "This doesn't get you off the hook," Marcus whispered to her. "You're still facing the music, but at least you'll live to hear the verdict." Evelyn Sterling was led out of the mansion, past the cameras that had already gathered at the gates. She wasn't the iron gavel anymore. She was just a pawn who had been played by the kings, but the war wasn't over. Julian Vance was still free, and he was already on his phone, planning the defense of the century. The trial of the state versus Evelyn Sterling began 6 months later. It was the hottest ticket in the city. The courtroom was packed. The air conditioning was working this time. But the heat in the room was palpable. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence, but the defense had Julian Vance. And Vance knew that in a jury trial, facts mattered less than the story. His strategy was simple: destroy the credibility of the accusers. Day 1 and 2 went by with technical financial testimony. The jury looked bored. Day 3 was the turning point. Sarah, the former court clerk, took the stand. Sarah looked terrifyingly young. She wore a modest blue cardigan and kept clutching a tissue. "Ms. Jenkins," Marcus Thorne asked gently from the prosecutor's podium, "can you tell the jury what Judge Sterling asked you to do with the Redwood files?" "She told me to shred them," Sarah whispered. "She said they were just old drafts. But I saw the names. I saw the amounts. So I hid them in the safe instead." "And did Judge Sterling ever offer you money?" "Yes. She gave me $5,000 cash for Christmas. She said it was a loyalty bonus. But I knew it was hush money." Sarah began to cry. The jury looked sympathetic. Marcus sat down, feeling confident. Then Julian Vance stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked right up to the witness box, invading Sarah's personal space, just enough to make her uncomfortable. "Ms. Jenkins," Vance purred, "you say you hid the files because you were suspicious. But isn't it true that you were passed over for a promotion 3 times by Judge Sterling?" Yes, but—" "And isn't it true," Vance continued, raising his voice, "that you have substantial credit card debt? About $30,000? I have student loans," Sarah stammered. "And isn't it true that the access code to the safe was known only by the judge? And you?" Vance turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, look at the facts. We have a disgruntled employee with a mountain of debt. She has access to the safe. She has access to the accounts. Who is more likely to be skimming money? A distinguished judge with a full pension, or a desperate clerk who feels undervalued?" "I didn't steal anything," Sarah cried. "So you say," Vance smiled. "But the only signature on the deposit slips is yours. Isn't that right? The judge stamps them, but you signed them." "That was protocol. It was convenient," Vance shot back. "No further questions." Sarah left the stand in tears. The jury was whispering. Vance had planted the seed of doubt. He had made it look like Evelyn was the victim of a betrayal, not the perpetrator. Then came the main event. Marcus Thorne took the stand. Because Marcus was the lead investigator, he was also a witness. This was risky, but necessary to authenticate the wiretaps. Vance was waiting for this. He adjusted his cufflinks and approached Marcus like a matador approaching a bull. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said, "you conducted a very aggressive investigation. Would you agree?" "I conducted a thorough investigation," Marcus replied calmly. "You broke into a senator's home. I entered to prevent a felony in progress with federal backup. You arrested a sitting judge in her own courtroom in front of the press. You humiliated her." "I arrested a criminal," Marcus said, his voice hard. Vance picked up a piece of paper. "Tell me, Mr. Thorne, do you have a personal history with the judicial system?" Marcus stiffened. "I have been in law enforcement for 20 years. "I'm not talking about your career," Vance said. "I'm talking about your brother, Tyrell Thorne." The courtroom went silent. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Tyrell Thorne was sentenced to 20 years in prison by a judge in this very district 10 years ago. Is that correct?" Vance asked. "Objection. Relevance," the prosecutor shouted. "Goes to motive, Your Honor," Vance shouted back. "The witness has a vendetta against judges. He sees corruption where there is only law because he is angry about his brother. Judge Moore banged her gavel. I will allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Vance. Vance turned back to Marcus with a smirk. You aren't here for justice, are you, Mr. Thorne? You're here for revenge. You saw a strict, white female judge, and you projected all your anger onto her. You wanted to take her down to make yourself feel better about failing your brother. That is a lie, Marcus said, but his voice was shaking with suppressed rage. Is it? Vance leaned in. You intimidated witnesses. You made deals with criminals like Sarah Jenkins. You orchestrated a media circus. This isn't an investigation, Mr. Thorne. It's a hit job. Vance turned to the jury. This man is not an unbiased investigator. He is a man on a crusade, and he didn't care who he destroyed to get his trophy. Vance sat down. Marcus looked at the jury. They were avoiding his eyes. They saw an angry man. They saw the narrative Vance had painted. That evening, the news channels were buzzing. Overzealous investigator, the headlines read. Judge Sterling, victim of a vendetta. In the holding cell, waiting for the transport back to jail for the night, her bail had been revoked after the senator incident, Evelyn Sterling sat with Julian Vance. You were brilliant, Julian, she said, a glimmer of her old arrogance returning. Did you see the jury? They hate him. We have them, Vance nodded. The reasonable doubt is the size of a truck. If we keep this up, you'll be acquitted on the major charges. You might get a slap on the wrist for misconduct. But you won't go to prison. Evelyn smiled. She leaned back against the concrete wall. I told him he was nobody. He should have listened. Back in his office, Marcus sat in the dark. The case was slipping away. The jury was confused. The narrative was lost. He needed something else. The wiretaps were good, but Vance had explained them away as out of context. The financial records were complex and boring. He needed a smoking gun. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Thorne, he answered. Mr. Thorne? A voice whispered. It sounded like an old man. You don't know me, but I was the bailiff in courtroom 4B before Miller. I retired 5 years ago. I'm listening, Marcus said, sitting up. Evelyn kept something else, the old man said. Not just a ledger. She kept recordings, in her chambers, under the floorboard beneath the rug where she put her robe stand. She recorded the meetings with the lawyers, insurance, in case they ever turned on her. Marcus gripped the phone. Why are you telling me this now? Because, the voice trembled, I watched the news today, and I heard what Vance said about your brother. I was in the court that day, son. Your brother didn't do it, and I can't let her get away with it again. Marcus hung up. He looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. He grabbed his coat. He wasn't going to sleep. He was going to the courthouse. The courthouse was silent at 3:15 a.m., save for the squeak of rubber soles on the marble floor. Marcus Thorne wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 FBI agents and Judge Harriet Moore, who had been woken up to sign an emergency search warrant. They stood inside Evelyn Sterling's chambers. It was a shrine to her ego, awards on the wall, photos with governors, the smell of expensive perfume still lingering. This feels like a violation, Judge Moore said, her arms crossed, watching Marcus move the heavy furniture. The violation happened when she sold this room to the highest bidder, Marcus grunted, shoving the heavy oak robe stand aside. He pulled back the Persian rug. There it was, a loose floorboard, slightly lighter than the rest. Marcus used a pry bar. The wood groaned and popped. Beneath the subfloor, nestled in the insulation, was a fireproof lockbox. Marcus didn't need a code. He had the lock-picking kit he used back in his beat cop days. With a sharp click, the lid sprang open. Inside weren't stacks of cash. It was worse. It was a stack of SD cards, each labeled with a year. Marcus picked up the one labeled 2023. He put it into his portable reader and put on headphones. He listened for 10 seconds. His face went pale. Then a look of terrifying calm washed over him. "Judge Moore," Marcus said, handing her the headphones. "You need to hear this, and so does the jury." The courtroom was buzzing with electric energy. Julian Vance stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked like a man who had already won the lottery. "Your Honor," Vance boomed, addressing the court, "the prosecution has failed to provide concrete evidence of quid pro quo. They have relied on the testimony of a disgruntled clerk and the obsession of a biased investigator. We move for an immediate dismissal of all charges." Evelyn Sterling sat tall, a smirk playing on her lips. She was already planning her press conference. She would announce her re-election campaign right on the courthouse steps. "Mr. Thorne?" Judge Moore asked, looking over her glasses. "Do you have a response?" Marcus stood up. He didn't look at Vance. He looked directly at Evelyn. "The state calls no further witnesses, Your Honor," Marcus said, "but we offer one final piece of rebuttal evidence, entered as Exhibit Z." He held up a small flash drive. "Objection!" Vance shouted. "Ambush! We haven't seen this evidence." "This evidence was seized 4 hours ago via a warrant signed by this court," Judge Moore said calmly. "It impeaches the defendant's claim of good character. Objection overruled. Play the tape, Mr. Thorne." The room went deathly silent. Marcus plugged the drive into the AV system. A voice filled the room. It was unmistakable. It was Evelyn Sterling. Audio playback. Evelyn. "So, how much is the Richards family offering?" "Vance," voice identified. 50,000. But they want a guarantee. No jail time for the kid. Evelyn, laughing. "For breaking that girl's jaw? Fine. I'll give him probation. Just tell him to cry when he apologizes. I love it when they beg." Vance. "And what about the other case? The robbery? The Elmore kid?" Evelyn. "David Elmore? The one with the sick mother?" Vance. "Yeah. His public defender says he has an alibi video." Evelyn. "I don't care if he has a note from God himself. I need to clear the docket before my flight to Vegas. Throw the evidence out. Give him 10 years. Nobody cares about a kid like that. He's a nobody." Evelyn. Sound of ice clinking in a glass. "Besides, the prison system needs bodies. It keeps the funding up." "Cheers, Julian." Click. The silence that followed was louder than a scream. Every juror was staring at Evelyn Sterling with a look of pure revulsion. The press gallery was in an uproar. Julian Vance slowly sat down. He put his face in his hands. He knew it was over. He was on the tape, too. He wasn't just her lawyer anymore. He was her co-defendant. Evelyn stood up. Her face was white as a sheet. That's doctored. That's AI. I never said that." "Sit down, Ms. Sterling," Judge Moore commanded. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was thunder. "I will not sit down," Evelyn shrieked, the mask finally slipping completely. "I am this court. You are all beneath me. I decide who matters. Me." "Sheriffs," Judge Moore said coldly, "restrain the defendant." Officer Miller, the man Evelyn had bullied for 20 years, stepped forward. He unhooked his handcuffs. "Turn around, Evelyn," Miller said. He didn't call her Your Honor. As the cuffs clicked shut, Evelyn looked at the prosecution table. She locked eyes with Marcus Thorne. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded once. "You're nobody now," the nod said. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. 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 On all 24 counts. Judge Harriet Moore didn't wait for a sentencing hearing. She waived the delay. "Evelyn Sterling," Judge Moore said, looking down from the bench, "you were entrusted with the sacred power of the law. You used it to enrich yourself and destroy the vulnerable. You called David Elmore a nobody, but his life mattered, and because of your greed, he is dead." Judge Moore took a breath. "I sentence you to 30 years in the state penitentiary. No possibility of parole for 20 years. And I am ordering that you serve your time in the general population." Evelyn gasped. "General population? You can't. They'll kill me." "You should have thought about that when you sent them there," Judge Moore said. She banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. 6 months later, the state penitentiary for women was loud, smelling of bleach and despair. In the cafeteria, a woman in a grey jumpsuit sat alone at a metal table. Her hair was chopped short, lice protocol. Her hands were rough from scrubbing floors in the laundry detail. Evelyn Sterling stared at her tray of grey mash. "Hey!" a voice called out. Evelyn flinched. She looked up. Standing there was a tall, tough-looking woman with tattoos up her neck. "You're the judge, right?" the woman asked. "The one who gave me 5 years for a bounced check?" Evelyn trembled. I was doing my job." "Your job?" the woman sneered. She knocked Evelyn's tray onto the floor. The food splattered everywhere. "Clean it up," the woman ordered. Evelyn looked around for a guard. The guard on duty was watching. He saw it happen. He turned his back and walked away. Evelyn fell to her knees. She grabbed a napkin and started wiping up the mess. Tears streamed down her face, dripping onto the cold concrete. She wasn't the iron gavel anymore. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She was just a number. She was just a cleaner. She was a nobody. And miles away, in a quiet cemetery, Marcus Thorne placed a fresh bouquet of flowers on a grave that read, "David Elmore, beloved son." "You can rest now, David," Marcus whispered. "The debt is paid." Marcus stood up, buttoned his coat against the wind, and walked away. His job was done. The scales were balanced, and that is the story of Judge Evelyn Sterling, a woman who thought she was a god, only to find out she was just a criminal in a robe. It's a brutal reminder that power doesn't make you right, and position doesn't make you untouchable. Evelyn built her empire on the suffering of people she thought were nobodies, but in the end, it was a nobody who brought her down. This story shows us that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deep you bury it under floorboards or legal briefs. What do you think? Did Evelyn get the punishment she deserved? Or should the system have been even harder on her? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next court case.